Wait, hang on. Okay, I believe we've got everybody on here. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We're honored to have here a wide array of leaders from Staten Island and South Brooklyn, and most importantly, Special Envoy Elan Carr, the State Department Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. I'm Asher Zlotnick. I'm the Congressman Rose's Senior Policy Advisor, and I'll be moderating today. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that they can use the Q&A function on Zoom to put questions to the panelists that, time permitting, we'll get to all of them at the end of the event. If we have any media on the air, for clearance purposes, we're going to need to check with the State Department before any part of this is being used or published. So please check with our office in advance, and we'll go through the clearance processes. To get started with the event, and before we get to Congressman Rose and Special Envoy Carr, I just want to recognize our co-hosts who've helped bring this event together. We've got Scott and Mendy, Scott Maurer and Mendy Moroznik of the Council of Jewish Organizations of Staten Island, and the co-chairman of the Staten Island Hate Crime Task Force. We also have Joey Towell, CEO of the Sephardic Community Center, Orit Lender, the CEO of the JCC of Staten Island, and we also have Rabbi Sussman of Temple Emmanuel, and a leader of Staten Islanders Against Anti-Semitism. We're honored to be joined today by Special Envoy Carr, who was appointed to the position by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in February 2019. He's the fourth special envoy to fill that position. Before being appointed, Mr. Carr served as Deputy District Attorney in Los Angeles and as a Judge Adjutant General in the Army Reserve. As an Army JAG, he deployed to Iraq in 2003 and 2004 and helped prosecute terrorism suspects and helped establish Iraq's legal system. The Special Envoy, Mr. Carr, has traveled around the world, coordinating with local Jewish communities and foreign governments on issues of anti-Semitism. Today, Special Envoy Carr will share with us his experience confronting anti-Semitism around the world and make some recommendations of what we can be doing here at home. Of course, we also have my boss, Congressman Rose, who's been made combating anti-Semitism one of his top priorities since taking office. He serves as the chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security's Subcommittee on Intelligence and Counterterrorism, and he'll explain what can and should be done by government, law enforcement, and ordinary community members to confront the rise in anti-Semitism that we see around us. So to get started, I'd like to turn it over to Congressman Rose to say a few words.
Asher, thank you so much for your incredible leadership in terms of setting up this event. And of course, to all of our phenomenal partners we are working with tirelessly, both to combat anti-Semitism as well as to serve the Jewish community and the community at large. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking part in this. Orit, Scott, Mendy, Joey, Rabbi Sussman, and so many others. And of course to Elan, Special Envoy for Combat Anti-Semitism, a title that I believe, based off the magnitude of this task, as well as your incredible service, absolutely has to be elevated to the right title of full ambassador. This can never be about politics, ever. Mr. Carr, Elan, you have done a better job than anyone I could imagine being in this position. And I am so thankful that you are here. I'm so thankful that you are able to speak to the community today. I look forward to a fantastic discussion. Let me close out by saying this. Anti-Semitism is here to stay. It's the oldest form of hatred. I hail from a long line of those Jews who have experienced anti-Semitism, some of whom have fled it. My great-grandfather left Eastern Europe more than 100 years ago and came to Brooklyn. He came to New York. He came to Brooklyn because it was a shining beacon of acceptance, a place where he knew that he would be more protected from the evil that is anti-Semitism. We have to do everything in our power to make sure that our best days in that regard and so many others are in front of us, not behind us. And I know because of the tremendous work that our special envoy has done and will continue to do, that we are closer to that beautiful, beautiful destiny. So with that, sir, I'll pass it back off to you, Asher, and then I look forward to this wonderful event.
Thank you, Congressman. So first, we'd like to have Scott and Mendy say a few words, if possible.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Congressman Rose, thank you so much for your steady leadership throughout your tenure in Congress and certainly about this wonderful event. I'm so honored to be sitting in front of such wonderful community leaders. Special Envoy Carr, if I could accomplish that much of what you do, this world would be a better place. I welcome you tonight. The rest of our leaders, Joey and Orit, and Rabbi Sussman, of course, my partner in crime, Mendy, Rajnik and Asha. I'm so honored that you included us in on this. My name is Scott Maurer. I am the CEO and the Executive Vice President of the Council of Jewish Organization of Staten Island. We serve the community both on a social level, from food pantry, but my biggest honor is to be able to serve the community to battle anti-Semitism, to be a voice in a quiet world, to be able to advocate whenever we can, whenever we see injustice. I'm also honored to be the co-chairman of the Staten Island District Attorney Hate Crime Task Force. And we have a model that a crime against one is a crime against others, and all of us. So I am so pleased to be here and to see that through this tremendous time that we have, through these difficult times that we have with COVID, with protests, with violence, that the ugliest form of hatred is being addressed still. So I want to thank you very much. I want to turn it over real quick to our president and to our guiding light, Mendy Marajic, just to say a few words as well.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Special Envoy. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Rabbi Sussman. Thank you, Orit. The biggest pride and joy that COJO has as the central coordinating agency of the Staten Island Jewish community is to bring the diverse elements of the community together, especially when it comes to addressing anti-Semitism, hate, which is important. What's unique about tonight was when Secretary Pompeo announced the appointment of Special Envoy Carr, he appointed a good man for a tough position. But I have to compliment both the Congressman Rose, who stood tall whenever anti-Semitism or any form of hate and racism has hit Staten Island and New York, working hand in hand together with an appointee of the administration. It's only through this bipartisan, non-political agenda where we remember we're all Americans. Well, it's natural to the Congressman as a combat veteran who put his life on the line for the United States. He understands the definition of protecting this country for all Americans to enjoy. I know my parents are Holocaust survivors, so I can understand how important this is. So again, I want to thank both gentlemen, Special Envoy Carr, together with Congressman Rose, for Toda Rabbi for doing a good job. And may God bless both of you gentlemen to continue and to succeed. I would say to fully eradicate it. Our goal is to eradicate hate, racism, and anti-Semitism, or uproot anti-Semitism. Until we have that day, you gentlemen have your work cut ahead of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks to both of you, and thank you so much for your friendship and leadership on this issue. We'd now like to hear from Orit.
Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to join you as a representative of the Alan Joan Bernacow Jewish Community Center of Staten Island on this extremely important event. I want to also thank Envoy Carr for joining us this evening, and Congressman Max Rose for turning his attention to this incredibly important issue. At the JCC, we're open and welcoming to people of all walks of life. We believe in unity and inclusion, and we condemn hate and bigotry of any kind. As you know, incidents of anti-Semitism are sadly on the rise nationally, internationally, and locally. Recent examples of anti-Semitism in our home borough have shocked and saddened us. That is why it's now extremely important, more than ever, that we condemn and stop any discrimination in our community. I'm grateful for the leadership of our community, that we continue to confront anti-Semitism head on. And I'm proud to be among many of the leaders here this evening, Kojo, Sephardic Center, Rabbi Sussman, and others, standing together against hate. Together we will be stronger, and together we will combat something that has been around for decades, but something that we will never stop fighting for, which is the stop of anti-Semitism. So thank you for allowing me to be here to represent the Jewish Community Center of Staten Island on this extremely important event.
Thank you, Orit. Next, we'd like to hear from Joey. Mr.
Thank
Towle.
you very much for having me here. I just wanted to say that I think everyone's really here to hear from the Special Envoy, so I give up my time to him.
Hey, Joey.
And last but not least, Rabbi Sussman, please.
Well, I just want to say how important this is and how grateful we are to Mr. Carr and to our congressman for bringing it here, because we're all worried about anti-Semitism. There's a deep sense of unease that is growing in the American Jewish community, but we don't know too much about it, and we don't know how much we should be worried about. There's an old joke, there was a Jewish telegram, it's a dated joke, and that says, start worrying, details to follow. And we don't know really how what we should be or should not be, and exactly what we should be doing to combat anti-Semitism at this particular point. So I think this meeting serves a very important need, and we are indeed grateful to you, Asher, and to the congressman and to Mr. Carr for sharing what you will share with us. I could think of only very few things that are as important as this issue is, and also virtually unexplored. And so therefore, I think it fulfills a very important need, and we are very honored to be part of this discussion.
Thank you, Rabbi. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Special Envoy Carr. Just as a reminder for everybody, if you have a question throughout the event, you can use the Q&A function to give us questions, and to the extent possible, we'll get to all of them. Special Envoy, thank you so much for joining us. And without words, we can't express your leadership and the level of achievements that you've had on this issue, and we look forward to working from you and hearing from you.
Well, thank you so much, Asher, and thanks for helping put this together. And Joey and Orit and Scott and Mendy and of course Kvod Harav Sussman, thank you for the incredible support, for energizing the community, not only here in this event today, but generally to help make our world a better place. And of course, lastly, Congressman Rose, thank you for what you do. Thanks for all of the support. You know, I always say that I couldn't do what I do if we didn't have strong bipartisan support in the fight against anti-Semitism. And you certainly have been a champion of this cause, and I'm very grateful to you and to so many other members of Congress in both parties who have really made this a priority. And it should be a priority. 1.5 years ago, I was appointed by President Trump and Secretary Pompeo to help lead America's fight against this ancient, indefatigable human sickness that is anti-Semitism, that only 75 years since the end of the Holocaust is on the rise everywhere in the world, including in Europe and including right here at home in the United States. And so I want to talk about, first of all, why this is happening and where this is coming from. Second of all, I want to give you, just in the brief time I have, a little window into the policy priorities we've exercised in the last year and we will have going forward. And then lastly, I want to leave you with some good news, because it's very important to remember there is good news in this fight. So first of all, what's happening and where is it coming from? we're seeing anti-Semitism rising from three disparate sources: ethnic supremacists of the far right, Israel haters and anti-Zionists on the radical left, and militant Islamists. These are three ideological camps that, if you think of it, have really nothing in common. In fact, one would think they would hate each other more than they hate anything else on earth. And yet they're allied in their Jew hatred. We have seen, even in New York, all three of these ideological camps operating to create the kind of violence we saw, for example, at Chabad of Staten Island, or the signs we've seen hung over highways and streets in Staten Island, or the attacks, the Zoom bombing, or the physical attacks on the street. Certainly in Brooklyn, we've seen this over and over again. I led a delegation of senior New Jersey law enforcement leaders and 3 members of Congress to visit the scene of the horrific attacks in Jersey City, where Jews were butchered. Think about it, in the United States, in New Jersey, in the tri-state area of all places, for being Jewish. And this, of course, follows Pittsburgh, and it follows Poway, and it follows incidences all around the world, including in Halle, Germany, where I visited. And so it is critical to understand where this comes from. And we cannot minimize or ignore any part of the ideological spectrum. The ethnic supremacists of the far right are deeply dangerous to Jewish survival. Israel haters and anti-Zionists of the radical left have marginalized Jews on college campuses across the world and have taken over mainstream political parties like UK Labour until they cleaned house. And we're seeing even in the halls of Congress in the United States, some of this vile sort of anti-Semitism spouted when a few years ago we never could have imagined it possible. And of course, militant Islam, which is continuously a problem. So how do we address this? What is our standard operating procedure going forward against these deep threats to the Jewish people and deep threats really to democracy and decency around the world? Well, first of all, physical safety. Priority number 1 is to protect the Jewish communities throughout the world, because if one doesn't feel safe, if you can't leave your home and feel confident that you'll come back in one piece, or put your kids on a bus and know that they're protected, you cannot have quality of life. And so policy priorities number 1 is working with our allies around the world to ensure that Jewish communities and Jewish community assets are protected. Second of all, hate crimes. We spoke a little bit about this just now, but it is critical that hate crimes be properly prosecuted and appropriately punished. I know something about this as a criminal prosecutor. I actually prosecuted hate crimes, and I know how important it is for law enforcement to send an unambiguous signal that society condemns and society exacts further punishment from those who commit crimes motivated by hate and targeting particular ethnicities or religious groups. I had the great privilege of meeting with prosecutors and police leaders in Germany, including 7 separate German states, discussing how best to address hate crimes and how best to train the law enforcement community in prosecuting hate crimes. I did the same thing in New Jersey. I met with prosecutors and police leaders in Ocean County and in Jersey City about exactly that issue. And this is critically important, that every jurisdiction prioritize hate crime prosecution. Third, there is, not everyone knows this, but there is a standard definition of anti-Semitism. It's called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. It's not controversial. It's been adopted by country after country. Argentina most recently adopted it. It's been adopted throughout Europe, most of Europe. President Trump adopted it in his executive order last December. And it is the standard accepted definition of anti-Semitism, and it is so important. As an Army officer, I can tell you, and I'm sure Congressman Rose will agree with me, that in order to confront a threat, you have to understand it and define it first. And so it is critical that we are all on the same page in understanding what anti-Semitism is. The power of the IRA definition is that it provides 11 examples that encompass not only traditional medieval anti-Semitism, but also the contemporary manifestations, such as denying the Jewish people self-determination, comparing the state of Israel to the Nazis, subjecting Israel to double standards to which no democracy in the world is held, all given as examples of anti-Semitism The IRA definition is critically important. If a country has not adopted it, it is my top diplomatic ask. Lastly, the internet. Look, the internet and social media platforms have not caused anti-Semitism, but there is no doubt it is the chief vector of this disease. And it is carrying this disease forward with a speed that we have never seen. It is one of the primary reasons why anti-Semitism is rising. A recent European study found that the amount of time it takes to radicalize a person online is 30% of the time. 30% of the time, not 30% less, 30% of the total time that it takes to radicalize someone through traditional means, like rallies and marches and secret meetings and smoke-filled rooms. Well, today the secret meetings aren't in smoke-filled rooms. They're in vile, despicable chat rooms where the venom and the hatred is something that defies imagination. As bad as you might think it is in the visible media of Twitter and Facebook, the visible web, once you accord these people the slightest veneer of anonymity and you descend into the bowels of the dark web, it is absolutely terrifying what is being said and preached openly. And it is costing lives. And so this has to be addressed. I'm proud to say that I am the first special envoy in this position to have a principal member of my team focused exclusively on anti-Semitism on internet and social media. This is a problem we have to address, all the while championing America's free speech values. Yes, even hate speech is protected in the United States. We believe that's a good thing, but that doesn't mean there aren't real solutions. And I'm happy to say that very shortly, we'll have an important announcement in that regard. And I want to leave you, I said the internet was last, and it is, but now I want to say something about a policy priority that is different from all the others. Everything I've talked about until now is all inherently defensive, and that's appropriate. When you're facing an onslaught, you have to defend against it. And so a lot of our measures are defensive. But also as an Army officer, I can tell you that you never win a war if all you do is play defense. In fact, you can't even win a football game if all you do is play defense. You have to also go on the offense. Well, how do you go on the offense against anti-Semitism? There's only one way to do that, or one, I should say, primary way to do that. And that is to turn the tables completely and to drive a philo-Semitic narrative. Because the opposite of anti-Semitism isn't tolerance. The opposite of anti-Semitism is philo-Semitism, the genuine appreciation for the Jewish story and for Jewish history, an affection for Jewish values and what Jewish values have meant for the world. Look, you can't tell the history of the United States, or for that matter of England, or of France, or of Germany, or of Russia, or Poland, or Hungary, without talking about the profound and deep and indelible contributions that the Jewish people have made to these societies. It is about time that we stand up and we affirmatively drive that narrative so that every kid in every classroom knows what the Jewish people have brought. That's how you go on the offense against Jew hatred, by preaching affection for the Jewish community. Let me give you two examples. One example is Germany. Next year in 2021, Germany will commemorate 1,700 years of Jewish history in Germany. And so now my team and I are working with our German interlocutors to ask, well, what is the content of that year 2021? It's not enough to make the announcement in January and then forget it happened. What is the curriculum that's going to be driven into every single classroom in Germany so that every kid knows it's 1,700 years? Example number two is right here at home in the United States. Many of you probably don't know, because very few people know, that we have a month in the United States declared by every single president of the United States and endorsed in bipartisan fashion by Congress, exactly meant to celebrate Jewish heritage. It's called Jewish American Heritage Month. When I go around the country asking, have any of you ever heard of this? I get a room full of blank stares. You know why? Because we, the community, doesn't do anything for Jewish American Heritage Month. For African American Heritage Month, Black History Month, you all know about that. Well, because the African American community programs, there's curriculum, there's public service announcements, there are posters, there's activities in classrooms for this, because they take it seriously. Well, we have a month for 40 years. It used to be a week, and then since 2006, it's been a month. But for 40 years, a period of time presidentially declared. And what do we do about it? Nothing. If we really want to be serious about fighting Jew hatred, we have to be serious about shouting from the rooftops the value of the Jewish story and about Jewish values. And so those are our policy priorities, and I'm very proud to be America's leader in carrying them forward. But let me tell you the good news. Because although anti-Semitism is rising, and although the challenges are severe, I don't minimize them, it's very important to remember that there is real good news in this fight. Piece of good news number one is that we are not alone. We have around the world champions of this cause, non-Jewish leaders at all levels, from heads of government to ministerial levels to parliamentarians to anti-Semitism coordinators, who are absolute champions of this cause and who are genuinely embarrassed by rising anti-Semitism in their country. They get it. They understand that the fight against Jew hatred isn't just a favor to the Jews. The fight against Jew hatred is the only way they can guarantee their own society, the only way they can bequeath to their children a world that isn't broken. Because as we know, anti-Semitism is history's greatest barometer of human suffering. It is a wrecker of societies. And that's why President Trump, every time he talks about anti-Semitism, calls it the vile poison of anti-Semitism. That's exactly what it is, because every society that has imbibed this vile poison has been destroyed by it. And so we have great, great partners and friends and leaders who get it and are fighting every day to rid the world of the scourge. And I have the great privilege of working with them every single day. That's a piece of good news number one. Piece of good news number two is that the Jewish people do have self-determination. The state of Israel does exist. And the state of Israel is a model of democracy and tolerance and world-changing innovation, protected by an army that is both strong and faithful to principles of law and decency. The state of Israel and its strength is a blessing to the world, and the strength of the Jewish state makes the Jewish people stronger everywhere in the world, and that much better prepared to combat anti-Semitism. And piece of good news number three, and lastly, even though anti-Semitism is rising here, the United States of America is still the most philo-Semitic country in the history of the world. There's never been a country like this, where Jews are regarded with true affection. The polls are clear about this. Rank and file Americans have a favorable view toward Jews. And today, America is led by the most philo-Semitic administration we have ever seen. Now look, this is not a statement about politics or party. It's a statement about policy. From President Trump to Vice President Pence to my boss, Secretary Pompeo, and to all of the other leaders, Attorney General Barr, all the other leaders in our administration, there is an unprecedented commitment to protecting the Jewish people, to championing the Jewish story, and to supporting the state of Israel. And let me give you just some examples. We talked about anti-Semitism on the far right. Well, our administration is the first in history to designate a far-right, white supremacist anti-Semitic group as a foreign terrorist organization. Never before happened. We talked about anti-Semitism rising from the left and how it has poisoned college campuses across the United States and in Europe. Well, President Trump, in a game-changing moment, issued an executive order that applied Title VI civil rights protections to students all across the United States. And I was at the White House when he signed it. When he signed that executive order, he looked at the cameras and he said, let me make this very clear. If you are a university and you are promoting harassment and discrimination of your Jewish students, you are going to lose a lot of money. This is going to be very expensive for you, he said. And I promise you, there's not a single president or chancellor out there who didn't read that loud and clear. And so that was a game-changing moment. And we did that. And then when it comes to the anti-Semitism of militant Islam, that kind of anti-Semitism is focused on two things: Holocaust denial and Israel hatred. With regard to Holocaust denial, President Trump signed the Never Again Education Act that ensures that American kids are going to be educated in what the Holocaust is and where the evil of anti-Semitism leads. And when it comes to Israel hatred, never has there been an administration more strongly supportive of the state of Israel, recognizing the eternal capital of the Jewish people in Jerusalem and moving our embassy there, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, issuing a peace plan, the vision for peace in the Middle East that acknowledges Jewish history in Judea and Samaria. And the list goes on and on and on. And so the last piece of good news is that America is the most philo-Semitic country ever, and we're being led by the most philo-Semitic administration ever. And so I'm confident that with all of us fighting together in bipartisan fashion, we can beat this and we can roll back the scourge. Look, we're in a period of time right now, auspicious, that we're meeting in this week, right before Parashat Nitzavim, a week before Rosh Hashanah, where our job in the Jewish community is to hold ourselves to account, to ask ourselves what went wrong in the past year, but to make sure that we reach our potential in the coming year. And there is no better time to talk about our obligation to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, to put aside all differences, be they differences of party or ideology, when it comes to fighting this historic and dangerous evil. That's what we're here to do. And so now, as we stand before the new year, I wish all of you Shana Tova. I wish all of you Tizku Leshanim Rabot, since this is a largely Sephardi crowd. I'll add that as well. And I want to tell you how proud I am of all of your hard work to fulfill the promise of America and to bequeath to our children that better, safer, and more just world that they so richly deserve. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Congressman Rose, and I'm very honored to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Special Envoy. Absolutely fascinating in hearing what the work that you're doing. I think for many of us, we see rising anti-Semitism around our communities, and we wonder, how is this being allowed to happen? So hearing from you, it's a benefit to see that it's not just words, but it's action. One of the things that you brought up regarding right-wing and left-wing violent anti-Semitism, and specifically terrorism, I think is something that we've been doing on Congressman Rose's staff for quite a bit. So now I'd like to invite him to say a few words kind of about the threat that we're seeing from white nationalist terror, anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi terror, as well as the violence and terrorism that's being perpetrated by left-wing and far-left and anti-Israel advocates. Before we kick it off to Congressman Rose, I want to note the Department of Justice on Friday arrested a group of individuals, far-right neo-Nazis, for collaborating with Hamas, the international terrorist organization. So it just shows that anti-Semitism has very strange bedfellows, and so I hope that Congressman Rose can shed a little bit of light about what we're doing in Congress to confront this threat.
Thank you, Asher. And Special Envoy Carr, your absolutely brilliant remarks speaks to why I am so proud to be leading the effort in Congress to dramatically increase the funding for your office, because the sky is absolutely the limit. And the work is so important. And I stand here today, as you all are certainly aware, as a Democrat, praising the work that you're doing, because it is vital, absolutely vital, that this remain a bipartisan issue. Now, we could say nonpartisan, yes, but in the realm of politics, Democrats may be in power, Republicans may be in power. When it comes to combating anti-Semitism, when it comes to supporting Israel, it cannot matter. And that is so much of the statement that we are making today. Now, this is a global fight as well. In my role as the subcommittee chairman for intelligence and counterterrorism, we have led the effort in Congress calling for the designation of white far-right movements with anti-Semitism built into their DNA as foreign terrorist organizations. And certainly, Special Envoy Carr is 100% correct. We were so proud to see the State Department designate, for the first time in our history, for the first time, a far-right group was certainly with a strong anti-Semitic streak as a specially designated terrorist group. It has never happened before. Now, certainly the work is not done. No one would say that it is. I'm the lead sponsor on a resolution that is bipartisan, listing the other organizations that we would like to be named as foreign terrorist organizations, all of whom have affiliations with domestic neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic, far-right groups. But a very interesting thing happened after the Russian imperial movement was designated by the State Department as a specially designated terrorist group. The very next day, their content was taken down off of the major social media platforms. The decision reverberated. The groups that have affiliations with that entity here in America immediately started to shudder. And we've seen it yet again with this affiliation with Hamas amongst the Boogaloo movement. We are finally identifying, this administration, in partnership with Congress, is seeing the strong linkage between anti-Semitic jihadist organizations as well as global far-right organizations to take the fight to them. Now, when it came to the president's announcement of this executive order, again, I was proud to be one of the few Democrats there at the Oval Office applauding this, making the statement that this has got to be bipartisan. We cannot have Jews in college campuses across the nation afraid to become members of progressive groups. Particularly, we see this in the progressive movement. Afraid to join progressive groups for fear that somehow they will have to choose between their pro-Israel beliefs and their strong progressive inclinations, because there is no choice. There absolutely is no choice. The two can and very well should coexist and flourish. And then let me lastly say this about social media, because all too often the movement against Jews, the rising anti-Semitism across the world is inoculating on social media. I led the effort in Congress calling on them to actually formally and robustly fund the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. And they will use this medium with Nick Rasmussen at the head, who formerly led counterterrorism policy at the state under Obama, to take the fight to neo-Nazis, jihadist organizations, and anti-Semites across the globe. It is that important. It will take public-private partnerships, and it will take bipartisan partnerships. And so long as I am breathing, I'll be a part of this fight.
Thank you so much, Congressman. So first, we're now at the section with Q&A. We've got quite a couple questions lined up, and hopefully we'll get to all of them. But first, I know that Orit wanted to talk a little bit and ask a little bit more about the social media implications of anti-Semitism. Orit?
Thank you, Asher. Social media companies have recently been in the news for controversies surrounding how they curate and edit political content online. Yet anti-Semitism, like Holocaust denial, among others, is allowed pretty easily. How can these companies be held accountable, and whether that by government officials or just ordinary consumers? We'd love to hear from you.
Mr. Carr, please, you're our special guest.
Sure, thank you. So look, you're exactly right. I mean, this is a major issue. The Department of Justice issued recommendations on a legislative reevaluation of Section 230, which Congressman Rose, I'm sure, will be involved with. And that's something that looks at the current law that accords total immunity to social media platforms for what they publish. And so that's one thing that the Justice Department has recommended be reevaluated. Then also, let's say that you have two categories of hate speech. You have hate speech that is protected by the First Amendment, and you have hate speech that isn't, that crosses the line into incitement to violence. In the tri-state area, we're seeing a lot of the latter. For example, this Rise Up Ocean County that we're seeing just a few miles south, right, is a perfect example of actual incitement to violence in certain cases. If hate speech is not protected, if it crosses into criminal conduct, it has to be dealt with. I mean, the law enforcement authorities have to come down hard on all examples of anti-Semitism and other kinds of racial hate that doesn't have protection because it rises to the level of incitement to violence. But now the large quantity of hate speech that is protected by the First Amendment, well, what do you do with that? Just because it's protected doesn't mean that there isn't a solution. First of all, the internet platforms have terms of use. And if they have terms of service, and if speech that might be protected from censorship or punishment violates their terms of service, they certainly can enforce those terms of service. So that's number one. Number two, if the internet platforms were to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is, here's a perfect example. We spoke about it earlier. Why is this definition so important? Well, because it could be used as an educational tool. When you have a volume of hate speech on social media platforms, well, if there is a counterbalance, an accepted standard definition of anti-Semitism that could be linked to and flagged, this is a perfect example of, you know, meeting despicable speech with good speech, right? That's the American way. We don't censor even wrong and despicable speech. We don't censor it, but we meet it with just speech. And so you can't even begin to do that unless you start to define anti-Semitism, and unless the social media platforms actually embrace that accepted definition, which is something that we are very strongly pushing them to do. So these are all things that can happen. And then lastly, you know, when one tracks how hate spreads on social media, it really very much matches the public health modeling that we're all now experts in, thanks to COVID-19. And it really is, when you look at how it spreads, there are hubs of contagion. There are spreader, you know, hubs of real, you know, rapid spreading, where there's a lot of hate is emanating out of that. You know, you can have civic society coordinate responses where you're not just, you know, randomly, you know, complaining and you know, sort of replying to posts and things of that kind, but with focus and coordination, directing an enormous volume of condemnation at particular locations where that condemnation would make a greater impact. That is something that we are working on, right? My team and I are literally, as we speak, we're working on exactly that. And we are trying to create these working groups where that kind of response can happen. But it's critically important that everyone gets involved in this, because at the end of the day, to meet that kind of volume of speech, we've got to all become activists and meet it with our activism on the good side. And then the last point on the internet is, you know, a lot of these are lone wolves, but let's remember there are state actors involved here too. And the Islamic Republic of Iran is the world's chief state sponsor of anti-Semitism and terrorism as well, but also anti-Semitism. You know, just look at the tweets recently that have come even from the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei. I just condemned in the strongest language one of his tweets, which is absolutely repulsive. I mean, he grows more repulsive by the day. You know, he tweeted that Jewish member of Trump's family, he said a filthy Zionist agent. I mean, this is medieval anti-Semitism that is emanating from the leader of Iran, and we've got to call it out, and we've got to be very firm on them. That's why I'm so proud that our administration not only pulled out of the disastrous Iran nuclear deal, but has imposed punishing sanctions on the mullahs of Iran, so that their mischief can be contained. But we have to understand that when state actors are involved in spreading anti-Semitism on the internet and social media, we have to go right to the source, and we have to be very aggressive in addressing.
And if I could add just one thing, look, we can also advocate through our leaders. Now, I took the fight against Twitter for having Hamas and Hezbollah accounts still on their platforms. And at first they said, well, there's good people. I said, what? What? And they took down 25,000 accounts or so. Establishing the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, we have to treat social media companies like the big business that they are. When they leave content on their platforms, they're monetizing it. So it's a very simple question. Do you want to monetize anti-Semitism? If they don't take this stuff down, and believe you me, they can. They have the resources. They're making money off it. And I am not okay with that. And I don't think this administration is, nor do I think members of my own party are, but now we have to act on it.
Thank you both.
You're right.
Thank you so much. I think the next question will go to Scott. Did you want to add something?
Yes. Good evening again. Special Envoy Carr, your speech was motivating, and I'm so happy that our voice is being carried by you throughout the world. Defending us. You know, we know about terrorism. We know about terrorist groups. We know about organizations that hate the Jewish people because we're Jewish. They hate the state of Israel because Jews occupy it. But there's a movement that started in Israel, the BDS movement, Palestinian authority, and people want to call for everyone to boycott, divest, and sanction the state of Israel, not to buy our products, not to speak with us, and calls for dismantle of a legal and a holy state. Yet that movement has sunk its teeth in the campuses throughout this country. My son, who I'm very proud of, made Aliyah to Israel 4.5 years ago, but he also fought this war as a college student on the grounds of Binghamton. He led the fight against the BDS movement there. He led student judicial committees to fight it. And there is a growing, and it continues to grow, not only just in the college and in the academic world, but now there is a call for the City Council in New York to stop council people to go into Israel in order to see the truth, that Israel is not an apartheid state, that Israel allows call to prayer of people that will kill them, and rightfully so. Israel says, please pray, and they try to live in peace. And to me, the BDS movement is a movement of poison and toxicity that needs to be stopped and needs to be addressed. I don't hear too much about it too often, but how would both you, Envoy Carr and Congressman, tell us what to do about this as constituents, and how are you trying to fight this evil movement?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Congress for condemning the BDS movement, which they did recently, and that was a great step. I will tell you that the Trump administration has been unequivocal on this. First of all, Secretary Pompeo stood before 18,000 activists at the AIPAC policy conference, and he said, let me go on the record. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And that is the marching order of every single person in the State Department. The White House has supported it. We're very clear on this, that if you hate the Jewish state, you hate the Jewish people. That's just the way it works. And we cannot draw a distinction and accord any kind of anti-Semitism the protection by saying, well, you know, that's different. That's not true Jew hatred. It is true Jew hatred. And our administration has been very, very clear on that. With regard to campuses, I couldn't agree with you more. Look, you know, I've been involved on campuses for 3 decades now. I mean, I used to be the international president of AEPI. I supervised 10,000 students on 190 campuses. And I can tell you, we were on the front lines of this war against the Jewish people. And that's what it is. It's appalling. Basically, Jewish kids on college campuses, not only in the United States, but in Europe as well. I meet with student leaders on European campuses as a matter of course, and I hear the exact same thing, which is, if you want to be safe as a student, if you want to go unmolested through your campus, you have to basically divorce yourself from your Jewish identity. You can't mention Israel. God forbid you should say the Z word, Zionism, unacceptable. And so you've got to rip that part of your identity out of your soul if you want to be safe. That's the price you pay for physical safety, because woe to you if you're not willing to do that. You will be harassed and marginalized and literally be in fear of your safety. That is unacceptable. I mean, no, I'll give you an example. A kid at a premier U.S. university gave me the answer sheet to his math class. You can't make this up. The answer sheet to his math class, and it says, you know, the derivative of such and such is so-and-so, integral of such and, you know, and then it says, another day in the occupied Palestinian territory, Zionist forces murdering children. And then it goes back to math. And the kid who gave this to me, with a voice reflecting exhaustion, said, in math class? I can't even escape this in math? Well, that's right. Even in math, because it is a focused 24/7 campaign of harassment and discrimination. And let's talk about what BDS really is. BDS, boycott the Jew. That's what that is. It don't buy from the Jew. There's nothing new about this. People often call this the new kind of anti-Semitism. This is not new. Don't buy from the Jew has been a rallying cry of anti-Semites throughout history. Kauft nicht bei Juden. We saw the pictures of the brown shirts holding the signs in front of Jewish shops. And in the medieval period, right, boycott the Jewish store, the Jewish shop owner. This is nothing other than that. BDS is the modern repackaging of that same old effort to suffocate Jewish existence through economic means. And so it is very important we're clear on it. We condemn it. We say it is not acceptable. And in fact, we make it illegal, which many states have, including New York. And New York gets credit for saying you cannot do business in New York if you boycott Israel. Many states, Florida has done this, Texas has done this. And so this has got to be what every single jurisdiction does. We've got to shut this thing down because it is good. It is old-fashioned Jew hatred. That's what BDS is.
Mr. Carr hit the nail on the head. I do think that it is important in terms of our messaging to lead with strength when it comes to this. This is an explicitly anti-Semitic movement. And by the way, they don't even take it to the full extent of their rhetoric. If you want to boycott Israel, well, throw your cell phone out the window because you can't use the technology in that. You no longer use GPS in your car. We have to show respect for the true extent and breadth of Israel's economic miracle. But when it comes to our college campuses, and again, I go back to this notion that somehow people have to choose between their progressivism and their Zionism. If you want to find a country in the heart of a region that is all too often filled with dominated by hatred and exclusion, you cannot find a stronger, more beautiful, more inspiring magnet for immigrants, a greater safe haven for the LGBTQ community, a country that has universal health care, a nation that has an incredible security net for the poor and the downtrodden. Israel, in so many ways, is a progressive miracle that should be noted and praised on our college campuses for that. So I do believe in our rhetoric. I do believe in our messaging, that we most certainly should go on the offensive, no longer just be on the defensive.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Going off of Max's point about going on the offense and what Special Envoy Carr said earlier about the need to be offensive on campuses and promoting education and, in his words, philo-Semitism, I'm actually blown away. The number of questions we've got about the number of people who are writing and asking about how to develop curriculums, mentioned the Never Again Act, the Never Again Holocaust Education Act. What's between Congressman and the Special Envoy, what are some resources and ways in which we can make sure that at the federal, state, and local level, we're seeing Jewish education be brought into the school, not just in our private schools and yeshivas, but public schools as well?
Well, actually, we launched in May. May is Jewish American Heritage Month. In May, my team got together a group of Jewish leaders and philanthropists, and we've launched the Jewish Heritage Initiative to do just that, to work on developing curricula and public relations material, specifically geared for Jewish American Heritage Month, that will actually be able to do that messaging, to talk about the Jewish story and how important it was to the American founding. The Declaration of Independence, that wouldn't have been written without those Jewish values. Endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. This is B'Tselem Elohim. These are Jewish principles that absolutely animated and inspired our founding fathers, not only philosophically, but also the whole narrative of freedom and the Exodus. These are, the civil rights movement drew inspiration from the biblical stories of the Hebrew slaves. And so this is really a story we need to tell, not only about successful Jewish Americans, that's almost beside the point, but about the Jewish people and about Jewish values and how those values are so absolutely critical to the story of the United States and our mission. And we're also simultaneously working overseas to bring that very concept to other countries in the world that to develop those curricula. I gave the example of Germany, to develop that philo-Semitic curricula to tell the story of the Jewish people in their country. Poland is a great example. Poland, Warsaw, has an absolute treasure, the Polin Museum, of Warsaw, which is, if any of you are in Warsaw, you must go there. It is absolutely a gem. And this is a museum that embraces with love and affection the 900 years of Jewish history in Poland. And yes, it covers, in the later part, it covers the anti-Semitism and the pogroms and the horrible things that happened, but it also covers the incredible contributions that the Jewish community has made to Poland over the years, and how the Jews were influenced by Poland and in turn influenced Poland. An incredible place. And so we've been working with our Polish interlocutors on how to bring that out, not passively wait for people to come to the museum, but how to drive that content out and turn it into curricula that's actually, proactively driven into classrooms. So this is all doable. It requires initiatives to do it, and we're working on exactly that.
Right. And consider me 100% a supporter of those efforts, because again, the notion, all too often in the community, from what I hear, people are afraid of the direction of the Democratic Party. And believe you me, there have been elements rising up in progressive movements. That has been a significant problem, and something that in my own party we have to push back on. There are things across the political spectrum as well that are a problem, but we have got to reaffirm, and that's what part of this is today, that there is a strong bipartisan pillar centered around putting politics aside and fighting this fight. One example of that is the Never Again Education Act. A strong movement to expand resources for Holocaust education, but we also have to make sure that education, when it comes to the Jewish faith and Jewish history, is not just centered around 19th century and 20th century American and European Jewry, but that we're also acknowledging the worldwide history. Some pillars of our community center around the Sephardic tradition, the Sephardic culture. Elan, correct me if I'm wrong, your own family's history centers from that region.
My mother was
to make sure that education is holistic in this regard.
My mother was a refugee. When she was 9 years old, there was a knock at the door. My family's from Iraq, and soldiers were there, and they dragged her father, my grandfather, who she remembers it was early in the morning, he had shaving cream on his face, he was in the middle of shaving, dragged him off for no reason other than him being a Jew. He was paraded through the streets in leg irons with other members of the Jewish community and then thrown in prison. And my mother, as a young girl, had to do what no young girl should have to do, visited her father in prison until the family escaped across the border to Iran, and then from Iran to Israel. And so, we have experienced anti-Semitism up close and personal. And as many on this call know, many here from the Syrian community, those are the bad stories, but then there were the good stories of centuries of prosperity and influence and a thriving Jewish community in Iraq and Halab and Damascus and all across the Middle East. And it really is, of course, Iran. So this is a critical story that has to be told. That's exactly right.
Thank you so much. So we're almost out of time. We just have time for one more question. So we'll go to Joey Towell with the Sephardic Community Center to take us out.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much to the Special Envoy and to the Congressman, because really what I'm hearing is that you guys are really doing a lot. My question really comes down to, and I want to wake up tomorrow morning and I want to do something about this. So what are the people, the leaders that are on this call supposed to do tomorrow morning locally to make sure that we start fighting anti-Semitism, which seems to be a grassroots thing out there. Other people, they start these little grassroots things and they grow into huge anti-Semitism. What do we do to combat it locally, grassroots?
Well, thank you for that question. Perfect question to end this with, because that's tachlis, bottom line. What can you do? And that's exactly right. Look, I'll tell you, we're going to do our part in the administration. We're going to fight this with all the power and might of the United States of America, and that's not too shabby. But I will tell you that even the United States cannot beat this alone. We can win battles in the war against anti-Semitism, but to strategically to defeat the world's oldest hatred, we need something more. And what we need is one of the most elusive assets of all, And this is, Joey, what you and your fellow leaders on this call can do. What we need is Jewish unity. That's what we need. Because when the Jewish people stand together, there is no challenge that can't be overcome. And when the Jewish people are fragmented, we can't possibly protect the Jewish community from enemies from the outside. You know, I'll tell you a great example of an incredible victory in the fight against anti-Semitism is the UK. You know, I will tell you that I met with a UK Labour member of Parliament, a courageous member of Parliament, lifelong Labour member who left the Labour Party, lifelong member of the Labour Party, walked out because this MP said, I will not sit at the same table with anti-Semites. I won't do it. And this MP said to me in a meeting, I tell you, my hair stood on end. One of the most terrifying thing that was been said to me in the last year and a half, and that's saying a lot, I'll tell you. This MP said, this disaster that we have in England all started on the campuses, but we did nothing because they were just students. And then it moved into the Labour Party, but we did nothing because, well, it was just the left-wing fringe. And today they won and we lost, and I no longer have a political party I can call home. And I'll tell you, my hair stood on end when I heard that. But what's the postscript? That was before the election. Look what happened. The Labour Party flew apart. There was a civil war. People said this is a disgrace and we won't stand for it. And then the public voted overwhelmingly to reject anti-Semitism for the United Kingdom. And by the way, it was rank and file Brits, and exit polls showed this. Rank and file Brits, when stopped and surveyed, said one of the reasons why they voted Tory was because they were embarrassed that their country, that the United Kingdom, should be led by a cabal of anti-Semites. Now, how did that happen? What created that civil war in the Labour Party? What created that incredible public outcry against Jeremy Corbyn and his group that ran Labour? It was Jewish unity. Before any of that happened, the Jewish community of England put aside all things that divided them. They put aside divisions of Ashkenazi and Mizrahi. They put aside divisions of Orthodox and more secular. They put aside Tory and Labour. They put aside all divisions. And they stood together and they said, enough is enough. By the way, that's the name of the rally that they organized. Young and old, liberal, conservative, Tory, Labour, Orthodox and secular, they together stood and they said, enough is enough. A big rally that said, we won't tolerate this anymore. And the three competing Jewish newspapers of London published a joint editorial that said, united we stand, on the front page. Extraordinary for being joint and extraordinary for being on the front page. And it basically said, the leaders of the Labour Party are a threat to the survival of the Jewish people. They were unequivocal. They were unvarnished. They were united. They stood together. And the country responded. And the Labour Party today is undergoing a beautiful, wonderful renaissance under its new leader. They're throwing the anti-Semites out, and they're saying anti-Semitism is not tolerated in today's Labour Party anymore. Now look, this is what Jewish unity can do. It is a powerful force. And here in the United States, we don't have it. And so we have got to stand together. Every single Jewish leader has got to stand together and preach Jewish unity. Because when it comes to the safety of our children and grandchildren, there can't be any difference. What difference could possibly matter? Differences of party or ideology or background or socioeconomics, it's irrelevant. We have to stand together arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, to fight this threat that threatens all of us, and threatens not only all of us as Jews, but threatens all Americans. And so that's what we need, Joey. To answer your question, we need
amazing answer. Thank you. I never would have thought of that. That's amazing. Achdut.
Achdut Am Yisrael. It's exactly right.
And if I could just close out by once again thanking our special envoy, Elan Carr. You know, I am proud to be the first Jew to ever represent this congressional district. And I must say this is one of my proudest moments as in my time as a member of Congress, to be working with you, to be fighting this oldest form of hatred, And to your answer, to your question, Joey, making sure that our voices are heard. We have a mayor here in New York City who called out Jews for congregating during COVID and ignored people who were getting together in Central Park in far greater numbers. Not too long ago, but just pre-COVID, we had people in our communities afraid to wear their kippah, afraid to go to shul, afraid in the 21st century. Now we have people calling to defund the police, right when we need our officers out there protecting the community. This fight is expansive and it is not going anywhere. But there's nothing that we cannot achieve when we're united. Nothing. And so it is once again my honor to serve each and every one of you as your congressman. Elan, it is my honor to work with you. And I just thank you so much again. You being here today speaks to the true brilliance, magnificence of this community. And we're all just so incredibly grateful. Thank you, my dear friend.
My honor and pleasure, and thank you for all that you do. And thank you to all of you on this call for your leadership and your activism. And truly, you are making our world a better place, and we're in your debt.
Thank you so much to you both. Thank you to everyone on the line. I know that we didn't get to all of the questions, but I'll do my best to respond to everyone afterwards. Anyone who would like to be in contact with us, you have my email. Please, be in contact, send us questions, let us know how we can help. And thank you, again for Special Envoy Carr for taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.